So this is something that I've wrestled with a lot in my mind over the past several months. And whenever I read the prompt for the forum, I immediately thought of a moment that I had probably like sometime last summer. I was listening to an album by an artist named Propaganda, and the song came on called Precious Puritans. And just for some background, like I'm not a history buff or anything, so what I'm about to say might be historically inaccurate, but this is just my understanding of the situation. But basically, the Puritans are like these people that are pretty highly revered in a lot of theological circles. Um, and, some people I know quote them almost as if they're inerrant. And, I think from what I've seen from some of them, their theology is great and things. But the issue or the controversy that lies there is that a lot of them, I don't believe it was all of them, of course, but a fair number of them were very complicit and even condoning of slavery. So there's kind of like the same ethical question around Yoder as to how do we, listen, how do we engage with these people's like teachings and theology in light of the sin that they did and condoned and kind of encouraged, I guess. So I was listening to this song, and the first like three quarters of it is this guy like pretty much bashing Puritans and kind of the ideology that we would still quote them or listen to them. He kind of talks about how, as an African American, his ancestors were enslaved by these people essentially, with the ideology the Puritans had was enslaving his own ancestors, and how it's kind of an abomination of the image of God and just different things like that. So the whole time I'm listening to it, I'm like fully on board with what he's saying. Like, screw the Puritans, essentially. Like I was fully on board with it. And then once he gets to the end of the song, the last couple lines hit me like a ton of bricks. And it says, I'll actually just read the last like five lines here. It says, and it bothers me when you quote Puritans, if I'm honest, for the same reason it bothers me when people quote me, their precious propaganda. So I guess it's true that God really does use crooked sticks to make straight lines, just like your precious Puritans. Um, so yeah, there's like this whole build up where he's just trashing them essentially, and then says, "But wait, I'm like the same thing, and people quote me and use some of my teachings, and like, but I'm just as depraved as like these other guys." So that really hit me, and it made me think a lot, and it stuck with me for a few days on how judgmental I can be of teachers and people that write theology, different things like that, and just how I can be very judgmental of them. But when I look inward to myself, uh, there are multiple flaws that when I look, if I were to be teaching, that would very easily disqualify me. So that just that really stuck with me. It made me think for a long time about just how like I viewed people, and just how I viewed a lot, Christian teachers in general. But with that being said, I do think it's still important to acknowledge, some of the wrongdoings that these people have done. Like with Yoder, I think it's important for us to understand what he did, understanding that God does bring forgiveness, and that's a very important thing to remember. But it's also important for us to understand the pain and suffering that his actions caused. I think just in response to what he did, I think the one article I think talked a little bit about accountability and how I think that's important in everyone's life. We're all human. No one's perfect, and throughout our lives, it's inevitable that we will make mistakes. Some seemingly worse than others, of course. But yeah, I think it's important to look at a situation like this with grace. Um, and I think I don't know the problem that I have, or I guess the battle I'm at with in my mind is that with for example the Puritans, with looking at their teachings, is how do you reconcile their teachings as a whole whenever they were preaching the Christian religion and teaching the gospel, which is like the greatest form of freedom that anyone can ever have, while also owning people. Like I think that's just something that's kind of hard to reconcile, um, especially with just that broad of an issue. But with Yoder, I think if he's talking about, I don't know, like election or like predestination versus free will or something, I don't have a problem like listening to his thoughts on it and examining them. But once it gets to if he were to talk about liberation for women, or I don't know if liberation is the right word, but something like with women's rights or the value of women while doing the things he did, I think that would be kind of a tough thing for me to listen to or take seriously, knowing in light of what he did. So I don't know, things like that. I think we have to look at, when we're looking at someone's teachings, we have to acknowledge the area of their wrongdoing, and how, I don't know if that might not make any sense at all. It makes sense in my mind, but just yeah, like just because he screwed up in one area doesn't mean that as an entire his entire theology's whacked up, I guess. Like I think, yeah, I think that you just have to examine it a little more carefully, I think, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I guess that's kind of my long answer to the first question. But the second question, with Weinstein and how we would view like his movies after everything that he did came out, I'm not sure that I would be less likely to watch movies that he produced. Um, just because I think, I don't know. It would depend. It would kind of be in the same way that if he was making a movie that was about the rights of women or something like that, I think it would be kind of, it'd be a very hypocritical thing for him to do. So it would be weird. It would be kind of tough for me to watch a movie like that that came from him. But I don't know. Like if he made a movie on a completely separate topic, I don't think I would have much of a problem with it. And I also thought of this example, which also might not be the most applicable or best example at all. But Martin Scorsese is like one of my favorite directors. He makes some really good stuff sometimes, but he has a movie called like The Last Temptation of Christ or something that I never saw, but it has a lot of controversy around it. A lot of like Christological heresy, I think, is in it, and it's like a depiction of Jesus's life. So it's like a very biblically inaccurate movie. That I mean I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot about it. Um, so I kind of like, if he were to make another movie about a biblical story, and if I was trying to watch a biblically accurate movie, I probably wouldn't refer to him. But he has other movies on, like he has a movie about like Christian persecution that's based on some true like events and stuff that I really want to see. I haven't seen it yet, but I don't know, that might not be the best example. But I think overall, what I'm trying to say, when we view people in light of what they've done, um, I think we have to examine, or at least treat the situation with grace and examine what area they failed in, and maybe in that specific area, if they've done teachings on it, then I think we have to be a little more careful with that. But outside of that, just because one person screwed up in one area doesn't necessarily mean that their entire ideology is flawed, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, yeah, sorry for the long ramble, but those are my thoughts.